Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum and I'm here at Rock Island today taking a look at a rifle that is truly a very cool connection to a neat piece of American history. This is a Hall model of 1819 flintlock rifle, and I talked about wanting to do a series on these, and this is part of that series. However, we're not going to be looking at the mechanics of this rifle at all. What we're looking at is the history that is directly associated with this specific Hall rifle. This was awarded to a kid, legitimately a kid, by the name of Smith Bateman for his and his compatriots' heroism at the Battle of Plattsburgh in the War of 1812. Now, the setup here is the British had invaded into New York, and one of the really decisive battles of the War of 1812 was the Battle of Lake Champlain, or the Battle of Plattsburgh. Basically, one on land, one on the water, right at the same place. The British had a significant naval force. It's like half a dozen serious ships, supported by a land force. And the idea was the land force would hold the territory that the naval force was able to capture in defeating the American Navy, the very young American Navy at that point. Well, the battle went badly for the British, and they were defeated in a really kind of a surprise upset on Lake Champlain. And at the same time, their land forces, thus unsupported, were similarly defeated by the American military, the army and militia units. Now, where this rifle comes into play is in Plattsburgh, right when this was happening, which is September of 1814. You know, everyone knows what's going on. The British are coming. There's a literal British army marching in, and what are we going to do about it? And the militia forms up to help the army with this. And among these guys, there are 20 kids, boys, from the Plattsburg Academy, ranging in age from 14 to 17. And they try to enlist and volunteer to help in the defense of the city. And the general in charge, General Macomb, basically says, you can't. You're too young. You're underage. We cannot recruit. We can't take you as volunteers. But, you know, I'm just hypothetically saying here, if you had a sponsor and someone else who presented a unit, then we don't have to necessarily know how old you are, and that would work. So one of their number, a young man by the name of Martin Aikin, who was 21 at the time, formed Aitkin Volunteers. I believe it was the Aitkin Volunteer Rifle Company, with these 20 boys with what arms they had, and they did have long guns at the time, as did kind of like everybody. And they set up as a 20-man little volunteer company and joined in the Defense of Plattsburg. And their unit was formed on September 6th. Over the next couple of days, they would engage in scouting and fighting kind of a retreating action against the advancing British forces. These kids knew the area. You know, these are boys who hang out in the woods. They knew how to get around where the British were largely on roads, in columns. These kids could get around. They could figure out where the British were, report back. And they were apparently quite effective in this and did some good work and were legitimately helpful to the American military forces. Now, the main battle would take place on September 11th, 1814. That's when the naval action happened, and in concert with that, the British land troops, the infantry, attempted to take the city of Plattsburgh. And for this particular action, by the afternoon of the 11th, Aikin and his 20 volunteers had been assigned to defend a crossing on the Saranac River. They were holed up in a mill. They basically took up sniper positions. Maybe sounds a little more sexy than it really was, but they took up concealed and easily defended positions in a mill on one side of the Saranac River at a bridge. Aikin apparently was a pretty competent commander despite being very young, and one of the things that he had the kids do was pull up all the planks on the bridge so that the British troops who were in that area couldn't just walk across the bridge. Instead, they had to try to ford the river, and they had to try and ford the river under continuous rifle fire from Aikin and his boys, and also some of the other American troops in the area. But the volunteers were a legitimate, functional, and necessary part of this defense, and they prevented the British from getting across the river and taking up advantageous positions on the afternoon of September 11th. So the battle was concluded by the end of the day. The British suffered a very unexpected and significant loss on Lake Champlain in the naval action. Without naval support, the land forces basically didn't have the support to hold their positions, and the British were forced to retreat back up into Canada in the wake of this battle, leading to, well, preventing a British victory in the War of 1812. General Macomb, who was the commander of the American forces in the area, after the battle recognized Aikin and his volunteers, recognized that, hey, these kids, like, they actually legitimately contributed to the successful defense of the city and to the American victory, and he praised them really quite highly. And interestingly, he promised each of them a rifle. Like, you guys, I couldn't find any records on exactly what arms these kids had, but they're probably basically like small game hunting rifles. And it sounds like Macomb's point was, wow, you guys did great, and you had this, hillbilly crap that you brought from home. Tell you what, we'll get you all a nice modern Army rifle as our way of saying thanks. Now, it would take some time for that to happen, but it finally did. And this is one of the rifles that was given, this particular one, to a kid named Smith Bateman, but 20 of the 21 Aikin's volunteers were awarded rifles like this. One of them was unfortunately killed in action. So let me show you that rifle. What Congress would present to these boys, men, by the time they were actually being presented, were model of 1819 Hall flintlock breech-loading rifles. So of course I have a video on the Hall itself, but what you do is pull this hook back. That allows you to open up the breech, and you load powder and ball in there, and then you can lock that back in place, prime the pan, cock the hammer, fire the rifle. This was a remarkably modern gun that in some ways can be in part credited with the development of the American system of manufacture and interchangeable parts to a greater degree than perhaps any other firearm in American history. So it's a very significant and relevant firearm design. Of course, what makes this particular one stand out is the plaque that was attached to it. This is in silver, and each one of these was awarded and engraved by name to a particular member of Aikin's Volunteers, with the exception of one boy, age 14, by the name of Peters. First name is not recorded anywhere. We don't know exactly what his first name was, who was killed during the action. But the others who survived each got, by resolve of Congress, presented to Smith Bateman for his gallantry at the Siege of Plattsburg. Really very cool. And then there is also a little thumb piece here with SB, Smith Bateman's initials, on the back of the wrist. Aikin's Volunteers disbanded on September 12th, 1814, having been a formal unit for all of like 6 or 7 days. But they had gotten the job done. They'd gotten the attention and notice of the military hierarchy, and they'd gotten significant praise for their actions. Now, it would fall to Congress to actually fulfill this promise of General Macomb's. And in the true tradition of the American Congress not being able to effectively really do anything, it would take them until May 10th, 1826 to actually officially get these rifles and present them to the boys of Aikin's Volunteers. So 1814, 1826, it took them 12 years to actually get this done, but by goodness, they did get it done. Aikin himself would die in 1828, just 2 years after finally receiving his rifle. But that, by the way, is why we have an 1819 pattern of rifle being awarded for actions in the War of 1812 that took place in 1814. It took so long for Congress to do this that the rifle they ended up presenting hadn't even been adopted when Macomb promised them to these kids. So anyway, I think this is just a fantastic piece of Americana. To the best of my knowledge, this is the only time that Congress has presented rifles to civilians, effectively. And so I think that's just really quite neat. A handful of these survive. Of course, they were all in private hands because they all have been handed down through the descendants of Aikin's actual volunteers. hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. This is a neat chance to get a look at one of these up close. Thanks for watching.